The Steppe Storm, an epic saga, slightly violent, of history's most successful military startup. In the early 13th century, while most of the world was busy with petty feudal wars, building cathedrals, and arguing about theology, a force of nature was awakening on the windswept, bone-chillingly cold, and generally uninteresting steppes of Central Asia. This was no ordinary kingdom. It was a military startup with a disruptive business model, a seismic shock that was about to rock the entire planet. Under the leadership of a CEO, founder, and unparalleled military genius named Temüjin, who the world would later know by his much more terrifying stage name, Genghis Khan, the nomadic Mongol tribes were united into a war machine so efficient it was absurd. In less than a century, their horses' hooves would thunder from the shores of the Pacific to the gates of Europe, creating the largest contiguous land empire in human history. An empire so vast it made the once mighty Roman Empire look like a village pond. This is not just a story of conquests so bloody they would make horror film directors blush. It is an epic of global change. It is a story of destruction on an industrial scale and rebirth from the ashes, of a world suddenly connected by a surprisingly safe transportation network, as long as you didn't resist its owners, and of the world map being brutally and permanently redrawn. Temüjin, the abandoned child who became the alpha wolf. Before becoming the terror of Eurasia, the Mongols were basically a chaotic mess of outlaw motorcycle clubs, constantly riding around, starting fights, and killing each other over grazing lands, livestock, and sometimes just because they were bored. They lived in gurs, yurts, which could be disassembled and moved in a flash, what we might today call the minimalist lifestyle. Their lives revolved around two things: the horse, their primary mode of transport and emergency food supply, and the bow, their primary tool for conflict resolution. Into this chaotic and violent world, a child named Temüjin was born around 1162. His childhood was a survival movie script that would make Hollywood blush. His father was poisoned by rivals at a dinner party. His family was abandoned by their own tribe, left to wander as beggars on the steppe. The boy himself was captured and enslaved, forced to wear a wooden collar. Most people who experience a tenth of that would probably give up and look for a more stable career path. But these extreme hardships forged in him a will of iron, a vision that stretched far beyond the barren hills and the necessary ruthlessness not just to survive, but to dominate. Through a combination of talent, cunning, the charisma of a rock star, and the ruthlessness of a mafia boss, Temüjin gradually gathered loyal followers, made blood brothers, and proceeded to defeat every single one of his powerful rivals on the steppe. He was not just a fearsome warrior who could charge into the thick of battle and emerge without a scratch. He was also a brilliant social reformer. He did the unthinkable. He shattered the old tribal structure that had caused centuries of infighting. He organized his army based on a decimal system, units of 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. A system that was simple but brutally effective. Loyalty was no longer based on bloodlines or clans, but on merit, and absolute loyalty to him personally. He also issued a universal law code for all Mongols, called the Yassa, establishing iron discipline and order for a people accustomed to every man for himself. The Yassa had some very practical laws, such as adultery, death penalty, theft, death penalty, and if you dropped your comrade's food while on the march, you were in big trouble too. In 1206, at a grand assembly, a Kurultai on the banks of the Onan River, the Mongol chieftains, having been thoroughly beaten and then united by Temüjin, unanimously acclaimed him with the title Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler, or oceanic ruler, depending on the translation. From that fateful moment, the immense and aggressive energy of the nomadic tribes was no longer spent on destroying each other. It was fused into a single arrow, pulled back to its limit, and aimed squarely at the rich, populous, but deeply divided civilizations beyond the steppe. The world was about to receive an operating system update that nobody asked for. The perfect war machine. When nomads meet technology. The military success of the Mongols was no miracle. It was the result of a perfect formula. A combination of exceptional warriors, tactics so clever they were devious, and an astonishing ability to adapt. Lightning-fast cavalry. Every Mongol warrior was a master horseman from birth. They could grow up, eat, sleep, and fight on horseback. The Mongol horse, though small and unimpressive looking, was the 13th century off-road SUV, incredibly hardy, able to survive on scraps of grass, and capable of covering hundreds of miles without rest. Their armies possessed unparalleled mobility, able to appear and disappear like ghosts, making the heavy infantry armies of their enemies look like lumbering tortoises. They were also famous for their feigned retreat, the most classic, pretend to be offline, then suddenly come back online trick, luring enemies into a trap before turning to annihilate them. Sharpshooting archers. Their main weapon was the composite bow, a technical masterpiece made of wood, horn, and sinew. It could deliver an arrow with a death warrant to your address from several hundred meters away, with enough force to pierce armor, even while the archer was riding at 60 kilometers per hour. A Mongol army could unleash a storm of arrows so dense it could blot out the sun, turning the battlefield into a giant pincushion. Iron discipline and psychological warfare. The Mongol army followed absolute discipline. If one soldier in a 10-man unit fled, all 10 were executed. If that 10-man unit fled, the entire 100-man company was executed. With an HR policy like that, desertion was not a popular option. They were also masters of psychological warfare, a medieval form of viral marketing. Before every attack, they would send envoys with a special promotional offer. Surrender now and you will be spared. You'll just have to pay taxes. But if you resist, the entire city will be razed to the ground and no one, not even the cats and dogs, will be spared. News of this brutality spread faster than their armies, sowing terror and paralyzing the will to resist in the next city on their list. Adaptation and absorption. The Mongols had an extremely pragmatic mindset. They didn't care where you came from or what god you worshipped, as long as you were useful. They were the great technology collectors of their time. From the Chinese and Persians, they learned how to build and use trebuchets, siege engines, and gunpowder. Suddenly, the nomadic army accustomed to open field battles had the latest toys for breaking down the strongest city walls. They were like a guerrilla army that had suddenly been equipped with heavy artillery. The storm sweeps through Asia, the First World Tour, 1209 to 1227. After cleaning up his own backyard, Genghis Khan began his conquest of the world. A world tour that nobody invited him on. The Xia and Jin dynasties. The first targets were the troublesome neighbors to the south. These were long, bloody wars, but they served as a practical education for the Mongols in the art of siege warfare. In 1215, they captured the Jin capital of Zhongdu, modern-day Beijing. The city was sacked and plundered for days on end. The turning point that launched the Mongols onto the world stage occurred in 1218, stemming from the worst diplomatic blunder in history. Genghis Khan, now looking to expand his business interests, sent a trade caravan to the powerful Khwarezmian Empire. However, the arrogant governor of the city of Otrar had the merchants killed and their goods seized, then sent one of the Khan's envoys back with his beard humiliatingly shaved off. This was an act of folly equivalent to poking a giant hornet's nest with a short stick. The Khan's fury was unleashed upon Central Asia. In 1219, a massive, scientifically organized Mongol army invaded Khwarezmian territory in multiple pincer movements. It was a textbook military campaign of speed, coordination, and industrial-scale brutality. The great cities of the Silk Road, Samarkand, Bukhara, Urgench, which were the glittering cultural and intellectual centers of the Islamic world, were razed to the ground. Millions were slaughtered. The mighty Khwarezmian Empire completely collapsed in just 2 years. Meanwhile, Genghis Khan's two best generals, Subutai and Jebe, led a reconnaissance force on the greatest road trip of all time. They circled the Caspian Sea, casually smashing the armies of the Georgians, the Cumans, and a coalition of Rus princes at the Battle of the Kalka River. 1223. This was the first time Europe got a horrifying trailer for the upcoming Mongol blockbuster. Genghis Khan died in 1227, but his legacy of conquest had only just begun. The banquet had only reached the appetizers. Expansion under the heirs. The sequel is even bigger. 1227 to 1279. The death of the founding CEO did not stop the company. His sons and grandsons, who had been trained in a fiercely competitive environment, continued the business of conquest, expanding the empire to unimaginable limits. Ogedei and the invasion of Europe. Ogedei, the third son, was elected the new Great Khan. Under the command of Batu, a grandson, and the brilliant director of warfare, Subutai, the Mongols launched the long-awaited sequel, the invasion of Europe. The Mongol storm swept through the Rus principalities, leveling cities. The mother of Rus cities, Kiev, was utterly destroyed in 1240. They then split their forces, with one wing crushing a Polish-German army at Legnica, while the other, led by Subutai, annihilated the Hungarian army at the Battle of Mohi, 1241, with classic Mongol tactics. All of Europe was in shock. Kings and popes thought the apocalypse had arrived. Mongol horses drank from the Adriatic Sea. However, Europe was saved by a deus ex machina when news arrived that the great Khan Ogedei had died, reportedly from drinking too much. Batu had to withdraw to attend the election of a new Khan. Nevertheless, he founded the Golden Horde, which would rule over Russia for more than 2 centuries. Hulagu and the conquest of the Middle East. On another front, Hulagu, a grandson, led an army to finish cleaning up the Islamic world. In 1258, he sacked Baghdad, the 500-year-old capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. The city was devastated. The great house of wisdom with its priceless knowledge was thrown into the Tigris River, and the last caliph was brutally killed, rolled in a carpet and trampled by horses. This was a cultural catastrophe equivalent to deleting the entire internet. The Mongols pushed on into Syria, but the invincible war machine finally got a scratch when they were stopped by the Mamluks of Egypt at the Battle of Ain Jalut, 1260. Kublai Khan and the final boss battle. Song China. Meanwhile, in the east, Kublai Khan completed the final mission, the conquest of all of China. After decades of relentless war, the southern Song dynasty fell in 1279. Kublai established the Yuan dynasty, the first time all of China was ruled by a non-Han people. However, his invasions of Japan were famously thwarted by typhoons the Japanese called kamikaze, divine wind, and his invasions of Dai Viet, Vietnam, failed against daunting terrain and brilliant guerrilla tactics. These were the DLCs, downloadable content that the Mongols couldn't conquer. Pax Mongolica, a bloody peace and the breakup of the family empire. At its height, the Mongol Empire was a colossal entity. Though forged in violence, it created a period of relative stability known as the Pax Mongolica, Mongol peace. A peace bought with millions of corpses. For the first time, a vast area of Eurasia was united. The Silk Road was re-established and policed so strictly that it was said a virgin could travel from one end of the empire to the other with a gold nugget on her head without being disturbed. It was the 13th century version of Amazon Prime, facilitating an explosion of trade and the exchange of culture, technology, ideas, and also diseases, like the Black Death, between East and West. However, such a vast family empire eventually had to divide the inheritance. After the death of Genghis Khan, the empire gradually fractured into 4 major khanates, ruled by the descendants of Genghis Khan's 4 sons. These khanates became increasingly independent and even fought each other. Gradually, the conquerors were assimilated by the very cultures they had conquered. The journey of the Mongols is one of the most dramatic and influential chapters in human history. It is a testament to how a small, nomadic people, united by an extraordinary leader and an efficient military organization, could change the course of world history. Their legacy is one of both terrifying destruction and unprecedented global connection. A steppe storm that flattened the old world to clear the way for a new one to rise from the ashes. Thanks for watching.